All right, so this is journal entry number 4. This is one that I'm definitely the most excited about. I've mentioned it before in previous videos, and I will most likely be mentioning it in future videos, probably multiple times over, because I really do believe that Elden Ring really sets the standard for what a good open world RPG should be, and more so, what a good fantasy open world RPG should be. Now, to start off with just like my initial thoughts of this game. I mean, obviously, it's a game of the year game, and it's just it's fantastic graphics wise. Detailing, everything that they really put into the game. I mean, it looked fantastic. There was literally no area where I felt that they just kind of like skimped themselves out of that kind of you know work. They really did put in the work to each and every single area that you were going to be going into, and they just made it so different in every single area. There were multiple different enemy types or different environmental factors that you had to take in, and it was just everything was so vastly different and just made for such a great you know introduction to the world that you're actually going through, and also the lore of the story and the story itself. So moving into you know the thoughts of the story. I mean, let me tell you, I was awestruck by this story. It was really a fantastic story, and to be honest, there's been a lot of games where they have good storylines and good enemy types to go along with those storylines, and they try to make it make sense, but after a while sometimes it seems really repetitive. And to be honest, I'm probably going to talk a lot about Assassin's Creed Valhalla. In that sense, it's just really repetitive as you keep going on through the game, and you're still kind of learning about what's going on and how you fit into that world, but at the same time it just doesn't really end up making a whole lot of sense in actually building a new story to everything. So that's where Elden Ring really comes in and just blows it out of the water, because, and I would say this happens in a lot of fantasy games, they really kind of have to build the lore and the story on top of everything that you go through, because it's always a really hard concept to grasp, I would say. And take that with a grain of salt. I know a lot of people like who love fantasy type of stuff where there's dragons, giants, dwarves, orcs, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a huge following for those types of games, movies, shows, all that stuff. There's a huge following for it, but at the same time, if you take a little bit of time to really kind of look at each of these like fantasy, you know, series, or just the genre in general, almost always the creators have to really kind of ease you into it. They're not really going to just start off from the beginning telling you every little thing about the world, because that's information overload. And a lot of these, fantasy worlds are vastly different. I mean, they might still have similar types of characters, or similar types of, what could be considered as, humanoid, people like, I guess dwarves, or even orcs could be considered into that some sort of thing, or wizards, or all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I mean, they have to really set the scene beforehand in order for them to actually, make the story grow with your understanding of what's happening in the world. So Elden Ring really did do that. I mean, obviously, you kind of understood a little bit about what was going on from trailers or the initial introduction in the game, but you didn't really know how you fit into the world. Like, I mean, I walked into the very first opening in Limgrave, and I had no idea what to do. I had no idea what was going to come next, but it was, I will say, a brutal introduction. A brutal introduction because you walked up to I would say, for me personally, I walked right up to that first tree sentinel without knowing that it was an actual enemy. I thought it was just some other person to talk to, like in a lot of other games. They're kind of easing into it. Elden Ring said, "No way, you're going in, and it's going to be brutal." And let me tell you, I got killed by that tree sentinel in probably about less than 15 to 20 seconds. And I thought to myself, well, what's the point of having him there when I have no idea what's going on? So that's really where it comes in as you progress throughout the game and all that, you actually progress further in the story and understand more about what's happening in this world, and it makes a lot of sense because if you were to step into a new fantasy world, you're not going to know what exactly is going on until you actually live it for a few moments or longer into the game or show, or however long you end up living in that world. So that's what's really the best part about the game, is that it really kind of just makes you dive in and then learn along the way, so that way you can kind of stick to the aspects of making sure that you're understanding how to build out your character, or understanding how to attack the right way, figuring all that kind of stuff out, as well as you're also kind of learning what's going on in this story, what's going on in this world, and what am I doing exactly? I mean, for me, when I started running around early on, I had no idea what these sites of grace were. I mean, I I was more fixated on where am I supposed to go. And once I figured all those sites of grace out, I was like, oh, now I get it. Now I get it. And there was a whole pathway, and it really allowed for a lot more like player agency, if you can understand what I'm saying there, where like players have the ability to choose where to go, and even if they don't go to the exact first site of grace, you're still on somewhat of the right track, but you can kind of choose where you want to go, and rest up and heal and all that stuff. So that's what really made Elden Ring great. And I'll even say the exploration side of that really also added to the story, because you got to see a whole bunch of different uh, areas, or sites of grace, or like small villages or cities that were just blown up, like absolute rubble. And it was just interesting to actually learn about what's going on here, because normally they would have some sort of like little message board or something, and or some other people would put messages down, and all that other all that other stuff. I mean, that part really cool. I'll circle back to that at some point, but just the whole aspect of being able to learn from also exploring really incentivized a lot more of that exploration in the game, which also made everything a little bit easier going forward, because you would usually have better weapons if you got through that whole exploration, village, or you wiped out all the enemies there, or you got to this secret spot that most other people weren't going at the time, or whatever, and you found this great sword or this great staff, or a good talisman that really helped out your build. That's what honestly made Elden Ring so fantastic. And again, I'll circle back to all that, but let me just try to stick back into the overall story. I know a lot of people really didn't feel that the bosses in Elden Ring were that overly fantastic, but at the same time, I mean, like, I see where they're coming from. I mean, and a lot of people will say it's not about the mechanics and it's not about, how they attack and, how strong they are or whatever, but it's more so about, they were kind of unbalanced. They weren't all like, um, like ascending in difficulty. So some people who have been exploring a lot would go and just absolutely wreak havoc on that boss, and they felt like it was just too easy. And I get that sentiment, but then again, I mean, if they were just to kind of like, settle down a little bit and think about the fact that they just went through so much other stuff and they just leveled up so much more. I mean, these bosses are, kind of, made to fit a person who's not really doing any exploration. They're just kind of going through what they're supposed to be going through, and then they're going to be very challenging. But the game wants you to explore because obviously this is a open world fantasy RPG where you get the opportunity to go, learn about this world. So, and you also get the opportunity to fight new enemies and learn about what's going on there, and also get new gear and upgrade yourself. So it's not necessarily about them being unbalanced. It's, I think, they're there to serve a purpose of being more of a story guideline. And I know that might sound a little, iffy to some players. They might be like, well, I want a really, tough boss battle because that's why they're called boss battles. And don't get me wrong, they are all difficult in their own way, and they're all very, very different. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about Elden Ring, is that they're just so vastly different from, how Radon fights to how Godric fights, or how Godfrey fights to how Rykard fights. Even going to Melania and Mog, and all of them are very, very different, and the animations they use, the style is all different. And I feel that that comes from a good storyline projection of who these bosses are supposed to be. And I've read a lot of things about what people think about the game or think about the bosses, and a lot of people say that the Elden Ring bosses kind of fit into that seven deadly sins category, and I would completely agree with them. And honestly, it's really important that they did that, because here's why. So, fantasy games, obviously, you're talking about a fantasy, talking about something that's not necessarily human always in nature. It's kind of more about something that's so fantastical that it's kind of diverging from the world that we know today, or everything that we see in the physical form. But when you start going into something that's fantasy genre, then we're starting to get away from what is really in this physical world, and now we're showcasing different types of or different species of humanoid people, or that kind of stuff. And I believe that having those things almost always will require uh, a creator to understand that they have to basically somehow bridge the gap, make the story be believable to the human that's going to be playing it. So in a sense, like, let me think of the best possible way to say this. In a sense, you know, when a new player is first introduced to a game like this or a show or whatever, when they're first introduced into all of that, they have to believe that it's feasible or real. And the way to do that is to give a lot of these, newer characters human-like traits or emotions. So, in a sense, when you're looking at Godric the Grafted, you're looking at that guy and he's, ridiculously tall and, has arms all coming out of his arms, and this is what's called grafting in the game, that he's basically fusing other people into himself. Now, that's not very believable to, the untrained eye or somebody who, has never really played something like this. But when you think about the fact that he kind of represents greed, then you're kind of understanding, oh, there's a human aspect in that character. Now I understand why he's doing that. Now I understand a little bit more about the character itself, and now I understand why he's here. Now, if you kind of followed along right there, I know it's kind of a little bit of complex thought process, but I believe that the bridge between fantasy and regular human activity is making sure that a character still has some kind of human trait. And Elden Ring really emphasized that through their bosses. So, if we look at Radahn is basically wrath, or Melania being pride, Renala being lust, Margit or Morgott being kind of a sloth in a way, Rykard obviously being gluttony, and Mog being envy. So each of these kind of characters have some sort of trait about them that makes them a little bit more humanoid and believable to the player that's walking into this world. So they can a little bit more identify with these characters and who they are, and it really builds the story up, as well as giving the player the necessary information to understand what's going on in this world. So, again, sorry it was a little bit longer to explain that, but it's something that I definitely feel is incredibly important to understand for, the story-wise of how they did this and what I really enjoyed about, this game. And beyond that, I mean, obviously a lot of these stories are, kind of taking an uphill battle to a climax and then like a small cooldown at the end, and that's normal for a game. Obviously, your path is to become the Elden Lord. But the way that you did that is so interesting, and there was choices involved that could change that outcome and everything included in it. And that's honestly one of the best parts about the storyline as well, is that there were so many different little things that you could do in the game that ended up changing the ending to the story. Now, I mean, most people are going to say, oh, well, you still went and fought the Elden Beast or whatever, or which is America or whatever. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's a lot about where you ended up going in all of these situations, and what you did and how the story changed because of it. And that's honestly what makes the story so intriguing to me, and what really, left me satisfied with the game and satisfied with where the story was going. And also, anytime that somebody was having dialogue, I really wasn't skipping through it, and that's not the case for most of these games. And I'll reference Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Once I got through middle part of the game, and there I just did not care about the dialogue. It honestly felt like there was no point. I was just basically listening to a guy or a girl say the exact same thing that they had said, 6 or 7 previous times, and it's like, oh, you have to go, battle this army or take out this guy. You have to protect us. Basically, any of those 3 options, and that was it. So there wasn't really a lot of difference. But with Elden Ring, there was just so many different things that were going on, and how all of these characters were perceived to the other characters, and also yourself, was very, very different. So listening to what some people had to say was, very intriguing, and definitely, left you wanting to learn more about what's going on. And specifically, I think about, Gideon, the all-knowing, right before you actually, go up to battle Radigan and the Elden Beast and all of that. Everything that he told you before about what it's like in this world, and all these different characters, and then just to see him, tell you that you can't beat a god. Fantastic. It was just a very interesting twist that ended up happening that I really enjoyed. So now I guess I'll move a little bit on to aesthetics. So I'll say aesthetics and also dynamics. But the aesthetics, obviously, if we're on the surface level, if we're going to talk about, the graphics wise, very, very good. It was a very beautiful world. They did well with it. Again, like what I said before, they didn't really leave any stone unturned. They made sure that each and every area was either littered with enemies or littered with, foliage, or other people, or broken down buildings, and really set the scene for the story to happen. Beyond that, every single one of the character armor sets, or those kinds of models, same with the weapons, they were all really, really cool. I definitely enjoyed all of them. There was even kind of like a Game of Thrones sword that had a whole bunch of swords on it as well. I thought that was really cool, kind of a little Easter egg. But each of those weapons were very meticulously designed to look and act the way that most people, I think, would assume they would act. So it was very, very interesting to go throughout the game and try different play styles, and utilize all of these different weapons, because all of them acted relatively different. Yeah, sure, there were some sub tiers of certain aspects, but most of them would act very differently, and it was all kind of up to the player to decide. And that's where I come in with the dynamics of the game. Now, there's a ridiculous amount of different play styles that are going on in the game, because I'm sure there was a lot of people who were a little bit more cautious, and I'm sure there was a lot of people who were just like, I'm going to run past everything, or I'm going to fight everything. There's many different ways that you can approach this game and approach how you battle, and all of it really comes down to timing in some ways, but also just how you want to approach the problem. So that's honestly also what makes Elden Ring such a great game, is that I had a couple friends who were big time, I'm going to run in there and I'm going to kill everything, and then a few days later they're like, yeah, I don't do that anymore. It takes a little while, and you definitely have to build yourself up before you can run into anywhere and just kill everything. But Yeah, I mean, most people will probably end up being cautious at the beginning because you don't really know what you're going into. But the game really incentivizes you to be kind of cautious and making sure that you're making the right kind of moves and also hitting those sites of grace because that's going to heal you. It's going to refresh all of your potions and all that. So it's it's important, but then you also have the ability to just kind of rush through everything. You can run past just about everything because primarily you're going to be faster than most of those other characters. So you don't necessarily have to worry about them too much until you get to that final boss battle at that final gate. So um, you can play it a number of different ways, and I myself, I played it really cautious at the beginning, and then I started thinking, well, I can just run past most of these people, so I'm just going to do that. And then near the end, I just felt so overpowered that I was like, when I go in there, I'm going to stack up some runes. I'm going to kill everything and do that, and hit the next side of grace, and then not really worry about it. But then also there is that interesting little factor of somebody invading your world, which I really enjoyed that little mechanic that they had going on. It also kind of added to the danger of being in between um, the sites of grace, because if you know the next ones, like say you're in the next playthrough, which is also another great aspect, having multiple playthroughs, awesome. But if you know that you're in between and you've been kind of like just beating up on all these enemies, you've probably been taking a little bit of damage, all that kind of thing, you've probably been using your potions, and then you see this invader just kind of waiting for you, and they haven't used anything. They're just basically sitting there and they're waiting for you, and you maybe have one last health potion, maybe one last FP potion, and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to beat this guy. It all kind of ties into that kind of that aesthetic of this place is dangerous, and you know. I would say, the entire open world has many different aesthetics. I mean, of course, there's big open areas where you can, where you're meant a little bit more to just kind of run into the fight. And then, of course, you have like those little dungeons and, scary little jump, jump scare creatures, or, those little imps that just, you don't think are end up gonna like attack you, and then they just do out of nowhere. And then also like little traps and all that stuff going on. So it has that little horror aspect, little creepy vibe, and then it also has that like big, bold kind of I gotta go in with my sword pointing forward and just go and just absolutely try to take out these giants or trolls or people, if you will. So I mean, what's great is that when those times happen, it also still ties back into the creepiness. Like when the sun ends up going down, you might be in an area where one of those big death birds comes out, and you're like, you thought you were safe, but you really weren't. So it's a really fun, interesting situation that happens during the course of the game, and the changing of the daytime, or going into certain other areas. But it's really fun. It's really fun to have multiple different aesthetics through the open world, and I know most open world games try to make that apparent that there's multiple different aesthetics, but not all of them capitalize in the best way. So it's kind of refreshing to see a cave be creepy and difficult, and there's jump scares, and then having a big open plain being you know everyone's gonna just kind of run through the middle of that, or take charge, those types of things. So, and then obviously the dynamics. I mean, there's multiple different ways that you can do both of those things. I mean, you could be the guy that goes into those dungeons and just runs past everything, tries not really to get hit that much, and then just goes to the next side of grace, never worries about it again. That's a possibility, but you know, that's where those multiple different dynamics come in, and you can obviously play it however you want. So, moving on from the aesthetics and dynamics, I'll talk a little bit about the mechanics. Um, Now, this game, I would say a lot of people would probably say the same thing, that it does feel a little clunky at times, but that's, I would say, mainly because the developers wanted to create a good balance of timing and skill. Um, and with that, I mean, like, there's multiple different character types. I guess I should start with that. The amount of character types that are possible are, I mean, I can't even remember off the top of my head how many there were, but I mean, they were all very different. And obviously, there was a lot of different categories that you could upgrade your player in. I myself ended up choosing the astrologer, so I was really heavily focused into intelligence, and then later the stamina, the health, and the FP, and all that other stuff. So, um, and I had friends that were playing a little bit more of a brute build, like a big guy that's going to have a lot of power, and is going to be more of a warrior type when I'm more of a mage. And then there's, of course, there's people who can be the samurais, or there's like prisoners, there's faith builds, there's people who are stealth builds, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do it. And the best thing about it is that as you progress further in the game, you can change it completely. Like, if you start to feel like, hey, this is not what I want to be, what I want to be playing, or what I want to be, focusing my time on, I can change it. And it's really cool to kind of like build something out, but at the same time, it's even better that I can change how my character is built later on. And that's what makes Elden Ring, I think, one of the better character building open world games, because it is vastly different for each of those, and there's a lot of different weapons that will aid all of those character types, or all of that kind of stuff. So you don't have to worry too much about which one you choose, because all of them are viable. But in some cases, some players will probably feel a little overwhelmed in certain situations when they don't get to that really good set of armor and sword, or a really good um, staff or scepter, whatever, in that way. So it was really, really interesting to watch my friend play what we called the Unga Bunga build. It was really fun to watch him play that way, because I was so used to kind of just like being around the edge, not really like trying to get hit and throwing spells, but he's just in the heat of it. He's like running right into the middle of the enemy and going after it. And it was also fun having the ability to end up battling my friends in one of their worlds, or my world. It was really, really fun to be able to do that kind of aspect too, because then we could kind of figure out, okay, what is really the most strong thing, because most of our stats after we beat a lot of these people are probably going to be better than the ones that we're going to meet in the near future, maybe not the distant future, but in the near future, so that we could kind of build up ourselves that way. and figure out really what is going to work. Because let me tell you, there's a myriad of different enemy types. I mean, it's just like there are characters who are all about dexterity and they're wicked fast, and then there's characters who are really really powerful, really strong. They're might not be really fast, but they're gonna they're gonna hit you ridiculously hard, and you're probably gonna lose half of your health in one of their hits, and you're gonna be like, oh snap, I I gotta move out of here. I gotta figure out what to do. So having those different player types and character types, I mean, really incentivized everyone to kind of understand how to make their build the best it possibly could be. And what was even better about that is that you could fully max the character, your character, and be, the best at everything. And then at that point, you could just, you know, battle a boss however you wanted to. I mean, if you wanted to, be that guy that went up on Radon and, started melee battling him instead of, maybe shooting arrows or, shooting Comet Azure at him. So it was really, a fun situation to be able to go throughout the entire process of Elden Ring and, build out the best possible version of what your build was meant to be. And, it was really cool because, I would say in a lot of other games, you do see you have the ability to max out your character fully before even finishing the game. And yeah, there are a lot of situations where I like that about, certain games, but at the end of the day, Elden Ring didn't want that to be the case because, I mean, to max out your character fully, I can't even imagine how long that would take with, um, farming or, if you were that person that was duping um, those runes, then, I mean, more power to you. But I just couldn't be the person that was going to be sitting around constantly trying to get to level 713, I think it is, or something like that, and actually, maxing out beforehand, because it's just not viable. It's not viable, and that's why they have the new game plus going in there so that you can, do those sorts of things afterwards. So, I thought it was really cool that they made sure that the first playthrough is the usually the play style that you pick from the beginning. Now you could change it with Renala after you beat her, but at the same time, that's I would say most players would probably just continue on, and then when they get to the new game plus, they'll probably end up changing it, or maybe you'll even start a completely new game, stuff like that. So that was really cool. Obviously, I talked about it earlier, but all of the weapons were very interesting. Obviously, they had a whole bunch of different mechanics in place with them for that, like, that special ability. I think about Melania's hand. That special ability was really, really cool. It was really fun. Um, and then also just, having the spells, and I take this one a little bit more to heart because, like, that's the build that I created, and that's the way that I love Elden Ring, is that the spells were so, like, aesthetically pleasing. Like, they looked really cool, but they all served a different purpose, and they were all, like, very interesting and different in a way. Sure, there was some of them that were, again, subcategories of others, and I'm thinking about, like, the one that had the small blade, and then there was a one that was a great glintstone blade or something like that, and then there was a frost glintstone one, and the frost one I would say is most likely the best out of any of them. But any of those, but I mean, obviously there was other spells that you could use, and they were just all really, really cool. I mean, if y'all do ever play the game, I would say be an astrologer build for the sorcery and go around the world and find all the sorcery spells because they are really cool. They are super fun. And let me tell you, some of them are really, really overpowered, especially against invaders like um, Lusats. I can't remember what it's exactly called, but Lusats sorcery, um, and or the Ancient Death Rancor. I remember that one because I used that one a lot. That one was also boosted by death by a death spear. And again, like that also it's also interesting because some of these staffs really tie into certain spells, so you can kind of make your own. Like if you really really like a spell and it's like really really and it's working for you, you can utilize a certain spear or staff or whatever, and utilize that spell, and it's got boosted stats because of that staff, and it's really cool. It's really cool. So going into the next thing, and this is probably the best part about the game. My favorite part about the mechanics. Um, it's the fact that during battle, a lot of it's very seamless. And I say that because I think about the game Skyrim. Skyrim, when you wanted to change a spell, you like had to pause the game entirely. I absolutely hated that, especially when I was using shouts. I really enjoyed finding all the shouts and utilizing some of them, but at the end of the day, like I would have to pause the game to then utilize a different shout, even though like it didn't take up all of the stamina or magic or whatever it was at the time. Even if it didn't take it all, I would have to pause the game, go switch it, and unpause the game, and then get back into it. So it really broke the immersion. Elden Ring, however, did the right thing. I think it still could have been better, but at the end of the day, I mean, it was still leaps and bounds better than what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a lot like Skyrim, where you're going to have to pause it and do all that. But this one, you could slot more and more spells so that you could actually have a good arsenal at the ready. Now, yes, you had to click through it, and sometimes it was really difficult to click through it, especially if you're in a tense situation and you wanted a specific spell. Yeah, I mean that was tough, but at the same time, it still made it. You were still in the heat of battle. You were still doing all that kind of stuff. So that's what made it a lot more seamless. Is that I could just click up on the D-pad, switch the kind of spell that I was using, and go for it. And later as time went on, I ended up utilizing some of the incantations and faith stuff. So being able to cycle into that stuff too was also important. Now, what I wish would have happened would be a situation where you have sorcery on one side and then the incantations on the other side, so that you can kind of use them both. Maybe not together, but that they're still slotted so that that you can use them when you're hitting a certain button. Stuff like that. Something that would actually make it a little bit easier instead of having to be like, well, I want to keep this Comet Azure on for my other for my scepter or whatever, but I have the ring for the faith incantations, and I want to use the lightning bolt spear throw or javelin, and I couldn't necessarily have them both slotted. I would have to like tap up on the D-pad a couple times to get to what I wanted, and then I would be able to use it from there. But that's just something like for the future. I mean, obviously, it was still very, very seamless, and honestly, if you just, you know, took the time to, place them where you wanted to be placed, it didn't really feel too bad. But I mean, it still served its purpose. It still made the game feel a lot more seamless than when I was playing something like Skyrim. And of course, I mean, that was in 2011. I got to play, Elden Ring in like 2022 or whenever that came out. But yeah, it was incredibly more seamless. So um, beyond that, I really liked the horse animations and being able to do the double jump on the horse. I mean, I've never got to see anything like that before, so that was really cool. Um, and I really liked how the map itself was really, dictated into areas where, you had to go. So, I mean, it was still kind of making you follow along this path, but there was still a lot of other outside things that you can do, but there weren't, too many areas where you could just basically run across the entire map in a straight line and go from end to end. Like, there was a lot of areas where you might fall off and completely die. So that's another thing that I think really made the world building of Elden Ring so much better than a lot of other games that have been coming out. And I'm not gonna say like GTA 5 that was bad world building. No, no, that's a completely different kind of genre. I'm more talking about like the melee RPGs of, kind of like, more of a period piece game. And again, I hate having to do it every single time, but I'm thinking of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where I could basically run across the map in a straight line and have it not really be a problem. Now, in the case of Elden Ring, it's like you're gonna have to do some horse parkour if you want to get down to an area, or you're gonna have to go do, a certain, a certain requirement to open the gate to go somewhere else. So that's that's one of the things that I think I love the most about Elden Ring is that they did so well in their world building that it actually made it, you know, a lot more fun to explore because, you were kind of on a guided path of exploring. And, if there was something that you might have really needed to get, it was still relatively simple to go find that because, you know, if it was in, this big open area, you would have to look all over that open area. Now, if it's like something where like, oh, you missed, a few sites of grace up on the top left, like, okay, well now I know kind of where I'm supposed to be going to go look at it. That's where I gotta go, and that's where I would end up going, and I would then find the thing that I needed. So, I mean, obviously, it incentivized a lot of exploration outside of the you know, main way that you're supposed to be going. But at the end of the day, I mean, it was still really, really fun to go out and explore because I didn't feel like I was going to have to explore an entire massive area. I got to kind of like pick and choose where I wanted to explore, and I was also kind of guided on that exploration. If you kind of see what I mean there. I mean, I know not a lot of players want to be guided and all that stuff, and obviously the game is not holding your hand by any means. I mean, they're literally everything out there is trying to get you, but I mean, there's still just like they wanted to make sure that the players are still going to the areas where they want them to go. And obviously, you can take a big, quick left turn and go somewhere else. But it's still going to keep you in that kind of confine of where they want you to go. and I really liked that about the game. I think it made it made the world that much more interesting and made exploration that much more desirable to end up actually going out and doing. So I guess I'll leave you with some final thoughts, or I guess ideas that I would use in the future. Obviously, I would kind of add a few more spells. Make sure that some of those spells are actually going to be viable. I really liked Meteor of Astel, that spell, but it wasn't really viable in the end, in the long run, because most of those meteors would just not hit the target whatsoever. It was cool to look at, but it wasn't anything. It wasn't anything special at the end of the day for damage wise. I mean, it looked really cool. Same thing with the rain one, like the purple rain coming down. That one, super cool. Really tough to be viable. Really tough to be viable. Again, the summons really kind of differentiate those summons. That's one thing I guess I just didn't really have. As you know, most of the time when my friends would play, they would tell me, their summon is the mimic one, and I was like, oh, mine is too. Because most of those other summons, I mean, it was just so much better to have you as a player, because you obviously know what you're going to be doing. So that's how it is. But yeah, adding a little bit more viable summons that are going to like really kind of change the course of who you're really playing against. And then, like, I guess, I mean, I wouldn't say just add more weapons. I mean, obviously, if you're going to add more spells, add more weapons. But I don't really think you have to do too much other than, just, I mean, making Elden Ring 2. But definitely, those are a lot of ideas that I would probably add to the game, just to make it a little bit more interesting. So, absolutely, if you have not played the game, definitely go out and play Elden Ring. It's an extremely fun game. I give it the seal of approval. Um, if you want to play the astrologer build, that's the one I would go for. That's the one I ended up doing. But it's all up to you, and have fun with it.